Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Chat. We're super excited to have Rachel here, who's going to be talking about, from hypnotherapy to ketamine and altered states of consciousness. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight her and have her share a little bit about herself and her journey and how she got into learning more about altered states of consciousness. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to be here. Um, so how did I get into all of this? Definitely not what I necessarily foresaw. My undergraduate degree is psychology, and then I went to business school and got my MBA. So I was routing myself for corporate America, and then pretty quickly realized that that wasn't for me, and that big structured places that can struggle to allow for personal expression or autonomy were something that I was having a hard time finding a place in. And so I started to pursue other things. I started with Pilates. So I became a Pilates instructor about 16 years ago, which is pretty wild to say out loud. And from there, just getting more and more into health and wellness, getting more and more into the body and the mind and how the body and mind connect, which are pretty different concepts. Mind body connection are pretty different concepts than what we learn in Western medicine and in kind of traditional fields. And, you know, now I'd say in the last 10 years, all of these things have become so known with social media. So mind body connection is everywhere. And even altered states and psychedelics, all this stuff has gotten really popular in the last few years, but it didn't used to be that way at all. And I am most definitely old enough to remember a time when it was not like that. So it took a lot of discovery, and a person had to really seek out all kinds of different ways. And even 15 years ago, it wasn't anything like it is today. I think that Instagram came around in, I want to say 2010. So maybe it got more popular 2011, 2012, 13. And that's when you started to see things start to really kind of take off. And so from Pilates, I then got more interested in nutrition. And I've done a lot of bespoke nutrition in home healthy cooking, which I still do. And then keep going. That was when I started to get into more of the more altered state work, and a lot of which is my own personal work. I think that before we start working with other people, it's really important to do a a substantial amount of personal work, a substantial amount. So doing a lot of different kind of altered state work, which it doesn't necessarily mean with medicine. Yes, for me with medicine, but also exploring other things, exploring things like uh, hypnosis, breath work, meditation. Also, just being open to other things, being open to alternatives, alternative types of treatments, different ways that we come at our physical and spiritual selves, whether those are things like acupuncture or just other systems, Ayurvedic systems of medicine. So opening up to all of that has been just a large, grand opening for me, and a big perspective shift. So in 2019, I became a certified hypnotherapist, which came on the heels of doing hypnotherapy. Again, I'm a big fan of doing before I move anywhere else, in terms of that importance of personal practice. And so keep going. I am now, I serve a medicine called Kambo, and then I'm also a certified psychedelic practitioner, having spent a lot of time, working on the kind of more academic and knowledge based side of that. Also, with all of the personal practice and working with other people. So here we arrive at today, and all of that discovery and all of that was, without getting too into it, most definitely fueled by quite a lot of, personal struggle and familial struggle, and some challenging things that happened. And challenging things happened for all of us, for sure. Um, but some pretty profound things that quite honestly derailed me for a long time. And then I felt no choice but to figure out how to get back to a life that felt worth being in. And in taking that as, I guess, as seriously as I did, I've been able to really, kind of, I'll say come out the other side for simplicity's sake. Not that I think there's any side that one necessarily comes out, but um, come out the other side, at least from the perspective of some pretty hard places I found myself, to see so much opportunity and so much love and so much just heartfelt interest in, being a participatory human in this world. So that's where we find ourselves today, with a lot of skills cultivated over a lot of years, fueled by a lot of pain, and then also desire and resilience. And then we get here to taking all of that and kind of putting it together into doing, what I can to show up in the world as I do. So
That's amazing. Like, I love your journey and, how you've shifted, like, you've completely shifted your life based off of, your desire to learn more about yourself. And I would love for you to share a little bit about like the benefits of altered states of consciousness. Again, like we don't necessarily mean medicine; it could be hypnotherapy. But what are the benefits? Why shouldn't anybody like do this? Why would this be beneficial for them?
yeah, so I think that in this world that we live in, we are so bombarded on a second by second basis, uh, by by stimuli and by distractions and by things that are really really hard for us to sometimes process, and that starts essentially before we're born. And so it's just really important, as I see it, for us to take the time to explore those parts of ourselves that can often get neglected and ignored. And then also those parts of ourselves that can, again, go through whatever it is that we've gone through. That's really different for everybody. It can be big, like big T trauma. It can just be life and growing up and what it's like to be a human being without pathologizing it. And it's important to acknowledge what is, acknowledge the fact that being a human being is not always a simple or easy experience. I'd say more often than not, it can be a challenging experience. It can be one that uh, that can feel like a lot. And so being able to go into altered states, which is really, accessing our subconscious, or accessing the 95% of us that isn't functioning on the day to day, that isn't, the aspects of me that aren't necessarily present here speaking to you right now, while my, rational mind is taking over, so that we can have this very, very just streamlined conversation. It's important to go and visit these other places, whether again through medicine or without medicine, so that we can also address this huge part of us, this huge part of us that can sometimes go without examination or without question or without support. And so we need to really give ourselves the support, that other 95% of us that runs the show. I mean, our subconscious runs the show. We love to think that we're running the show in our day to day, but there's a lot of stuff beneath the surface that is generally running the show. So that needs our attention too. And medicine, non-medicine, it's still a way to attend to all of these spaces and places in us that do really need our attention.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Like, there is so much that we don't know about ourselves that's in the subconscious. I always see like the iceberg, the iceberg, you only
Mm-hmm.
see a little bit at the top,
Mm-hmm.
but you have like so much underneath that you don't see. You have to tend to it. Let's talk a little bit about one of like the, methods of getting to the altered state and hypnotherapy. Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
hypnotherapy? Like, how do you utilize it to help people with whatever they're dealing with, traumas or getting into their subconscious? Like, what is the benefit of that?
Yeah, so hypnotherapy, I mean, hypnotherapy is one of the tools that actually really helped me to get to medicine work as well. Um, so I was not one of those people who was able to say, oh wow, ayahuasca sounds amazing. Maybe in a month I could go try it. I had heard of it. I heard of it 12 years before I ever drank it. So it took me some real time to get to. But hypnosis was something that I was able to access. And so it was a really helpful way for me personally to start to go into some places that were hard for me to talk about, or maybe not hard for me to rationally talk about, but I think I should say hard for me to feel, because I think that we do live in a world where we are very much trained to be in our rational mind. We're very much trained to talk about things, and the words can sound good, and they can sound deep, and I can say words that are feeling states, but that's a huge difference than actually going into the body and actually feeling. So hypnosis is a way to access the subconscious. So again, we're going into the subconscious mind via just via various techniques that help to that you learn when you train to be a hypnotherapist, that help people to, slow down, calm down, come into the body, and then be suggestible. I mean, we're going into a suggestible state, and become suggestible so that we can begin to navigate whatever it is that people want to look at. And people want to look at anything from trying to change a specific pattern, like let's say smoking cessation, to wanting to look at past lives and being able to tap into our larger soul, and the soul that goes on journeys in many bodies, to maybe addressing some real specific traumas from this lifetime, potentially finding ancestral trauma, maybe even looking at actual illness. This is one thing I really love. It's an automatic writing exercise where you go into a state of hypnosis and you actually ask your body about dis-ease. I don't mean a disease, but a lack of ease. Let's say you have some kind of dysbiosis in your gut, and you want to go in and you want to ask some questions to your body. Doing it in a state of hypnosis is a way to get questions, and they're not questions that your rational mind is going to think of. They're questions that when you ask your body and you ask your inner intelligence and you ask your subconscious, we can get different answers. So hypnosis is a technique to go into those subconscious places, guided, so that we can navigate spaces that we don't typically visit.
It's really interesting how you said that, because it's so true that, like, our bodies are so intelligent, and there's so much that we don't know, and can't even understand until we spend time with those areas. And I feel like a lot of, the altered states are allowing us to quiet the mind to actually get into these areas. And what is like the best way for somebody who's new to all of this to try and to be comfortable with getting into an altered state? And then we'll go into some of the medicine work, but I would love for you to share, like, what do they need to do, or how do they need to prepare, like, because some people might be a little bit scared of this. I know I was before I started my spiritual journey. And what advice would you give those people that are newer on this path?
Yeah. Um, I always I always love to honor the newness, and I like to remember old versions of myself as teachers. So myself 5 years ago or myself 10 years ago are huge teachers to me, because as any of us travel on whatever path we're on, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a writer or a entrepreneur, whatever we're doing, it can be very easy to uh, forget where we were. And in this kind of work, I think it's so important to remember past versions of selves, and let them be teachers. So I I would say first and foremost, something that's really easy to do is to just start spending a few minutes a day doing nothing at all, and see what happens in that space. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 5 minutes of sitting down without music, without an app prompting you to think a certain way, or without words coming in telling you to breathe, or whatever it is, and just see what's going on, and starting to check in with oneself. and just cultivating that as a very simple practice that requires no skill. I think it can be daunting to come into spirituality or spiritual practices, especially in our super information heavy world where it can really feel like a competitive sport. Like wellness and spirituality has become some kind of a competitive sport where, oh, I do all these things and then I do all these things and you have to do this if you want to live to be 120, and it can be so much. But we all have the capacity to sit still for a few minutes and evaluate and just notice and just see. And so I really suggest starting there, because a person might realize that when that happens, they're very calm. A person might realize when that happens that they can barely sit with themselves. And a person might then start to look at what they're currently doing in their lives and see, oh, am I doing things that might be really hyping me up and making it so that I can't even sit still, like neurologically from a very physical standpoint. As an example, um, different exercises, right? Like if you go really hard and heavy with exercise, that might be good for some bodies. For other bodies, that might be actually at least sometimes overtaxing the nervous system, in which case we're pushing further and further into dysregulation. So being able to check in with oneself and start to honor the individual journey by spending a few minutes, I think that's a really great place to start before even deciding, oh, I want to be a meditator. I should really deep dive into yoga. Let me do a bunch of breath work. Also, giving oneself the opportunity to try different things. Try this different new type of yoga, or attend a breathwork class without any expectation that this is going to be the start of a spiritual journey or that this needs to be your end all be all. It could just be the experience, and it could be an awesome experience, or it could be something where you're like, I'd either like to not do that experience or I'd like to try a different version of that experience. Um, I also think that asking questions of people who feel accessible, who feel whether it's you respect that they have a big experience level, or you just feel comfortable in their presence, and then asking them questions about what their journey has been like, and then maybe getting a tip like, I really enjoyed going to this specific place, or I really enjoyed doing this specific thing as a starting point. But slowing down and spending a few minutes with ourselves in quiet and just seeing what comes up, maybe writing down a few impressions of feelings that arose during that time, and then starting to see, oh, this certain feeling consistently comes up. How do I want to start to look at that? It's a slower process than we might want it to be. A lot of times we want to take an action, and within a week or a month, we're like, okay, great, I've like solved and really made a huge inroad into this thing. It can be slower, especially on the discovery end.
I love how you said you want to slow down and really understand like where you're at and what your body needs and what you need, and to try different things, because we can definitely override that and think we need to do something and just try to do it and go for it because we think we have to do or that's the best thing. And I want to parlay that into like, you know, going into plant medicine or other states of medicine and altered states, because I feel like a lot of people think that they have to do certain medicines in order to get enlightenment or just get spirituality. And then also, um, there's also pieces around, people use that for escapism, and trying to numb out, which I don't feel like is necessarily the purpose of psychedelics, and at least in my practice. But I would love for you to share a little bit about when do you know you should jump in and try this like new plant medicine or this thing that you've heard about, because it did take me 6 years so also before I did my own ayahuasca journey and I had to really listen to myself. But how would you recommend people as they're diving into plant medicine and exploring that realm to start that process and choosing which one's the right one for them?
Hmm. Okay, so this I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to limit this somehow, because these are huge questions, and these are beautiful questions, important questions. So, and I'll admit, coming from the end of, I come from a uh I come from the end of working with these medicines largely ceremonially and largely um, very, very intentionally as opposed to recreationally. Having said that, I think that, and this has been, I'll admit, a newer part of my development, whatever way people want to access themselves in medicine work is really beautiful. And so I, for a long time, held a lot of judgment around recreational versus intentional ceremonial. And I think that a lot of that was because of how hard I personally had to work to come to these medicines, to be ready, to be prepared. Having said that, the amount of work that I did need to do, the amount of work that I did do, medicine always rises to meet you where you rise to meet the medicine. So if a person is really looking for a transformational experience or has really gone through a lot and realizes that some pretty big changes need to be made, putting in the work is, I think it's quite important if one is really looking for transformational results. Also, it can just be fun to have MDMA, and that can be it. Like that, and that's amazing. There's no one way. So I think that asking oneself about intentionality is really important. Am I approaching this because I'm really looking to discover something or change something? Am I approaching this because I'm just curious and want to have a fun Saturday night? These are ways, I think that these are really important ways for us to start. In terms of what medicine, again, the intentionality is going to steer that, right? So if you're looking for something really transformational, then we're going into, again, more preparation, probably higher doses, definitely needing to invest the time, the money, and the effort in having a trusted person help to walk next to you as you walk that journey. If the idea is just to start to dabble a little bit and just see what it is, start with lower doses. You know, a person doesn't need to jump onto a 5 or 7 or whatever gram mushroom journey. You can see what a half a gram feels like. You can microdose. Microdose is well under a half a gram. It's usually 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, 250. We have to do a little bit of experimentation with our own bodies to see where our tolerance levels are. And there's a lot of different medicines. I have a lot of experience with, but I have a good experience with most medicines, or have some experience with most medicines. I have a lot of experience with ayahuasca, a lot of experience with ketamine, Kambo, certainly plenty of experience with psilocybin, MDMA, 5-MeO, which is bufo, or they have some synthetic as well, and other things. There's so many new ones out there. There's new ones with all kinds of acronyms and synthetic, and there's a lot of stuff. And then there's ways that people combine things. Psilocybin and MDMA is a very common ceremonial combination. Ketamine actually pairs well with many things because the way that it neurochemically accesses the brain and our physical chemistry is very different than the way that classic psychedelics access our chemistry, meaning they're not competing for the same receptors, which makes combinations a little bit, potentially more beneficial. Having said that, I would say don't start combining things if you A, don't know what you're doing, B, have not properly sourced. This is very important, properly sourcing medicines of any kind. And you know what? Properly sourcing your hypnotherapist, properly sourcing who you're going to breathe and do your transformational breath work with. Properly sourcing is super important. I don't know if that really answers your question as concretely as you might have wanted, but I will say there's no one place to start. There's no one medicine. So depending on is someone, let's take trauma, for example. Is someone someone wanting to look at some trauma, maybe something specific, maybe someone has PTSD. or they have CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, which is a little bit different than traditional PTSD that we might associate with, um, for example, veterans or first responders or people that have been in really acute traumatic situations. We might approach those a little differently, but if somebody's wanting to look at that, that might potentially be a different medicine experience than someone who is just looking to explore consciousness and see what's going on. Maybe somebody has an allergy to fungi or to the mushroom family, so let's not use psilocybin in that case. Or there are all kinds of synthetic analogs that potentially could be an option. So in that way, there needs to be some conversation with self, and ideally conversation with someone who has familiarity with these topics. But people probably aren't going to hurt themselves if they well, people definitely aren't going to hurt themselves if they want to do some microdosing or I shouldn't say definitely, but very, very high, strongly likely not going to hurt themselves if they want to do some microdosing and just start to explore things. And then of course, recreational use. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people on here have experience as well, recreationally, ceremonially, and everywhere in between.
I think that's a great point, that you really have to understand yourself, understand the body, understand the medicine, and really find a trusted source for a lot of your journeys. How do you find those trusted sources? Like, um, where do you get those information or resources? I know when I was new on my journey, I had to like sort through a lot and find what was a good source. You know, a lot of people are just now doing like weekend classes and now they're like shamans and all this stuff, and I see that a lot, especially in the Venice area. And so how do you determine like what who your right teachers are, and what the right sources are, and you know, where do you find them?
Again, big questions. Big questions. So, I will say I moved here to I'm in Santa Monica, so I moved to Santa Monica about 3 years ago from Manhattan, New York. And I specify because people are like, "Oh, you moved from Manhattan Beach," and I'm like, "I no, I didn't even know that was a thing." So from New York, and it's been an education for me, the amount of spiritual stuff going on here, and admittedly trying to figure out how to sort through it all because it all sounds good and the words all sound right. But I guess we go back to asking ourselves, how do I feel in this circumstance? How do I feel around this person? How do I feel at this class? Or and sometimes it takes a really long time. I'll admit it took me a really long time to answer a question like, how do I feel? Period. Because my training was never to really look too much at how I felt. And in fact, growing up, my training was, I'd say, more based on more, how do I say, don't feel, or what you're feeling is not the right feeling, so change it. So, if anything, I grew up learning to not trust how I felt, so much so that feeling became something I was very determined to largely not do, stay in the realm of being able to use my words and my intellect to, get through life. So as I say, check in with how you feel. I also want to acknowledge that um, that's not necessarily a simple thing to do, to ask oneself how you feel, and then receive answers. So, but in terms of finding trusted sources for medicine, so that's really complicated because medicines are largely illegal. Um, you know, do I know trusted sources? Of course I do at this point, just having spent a lot of time. So I think that finding trusted sources is sometimes a time thing. Sometimes it's just meeting the right person, without sounding too out there, because I'm a big fan of grounded spirituality. But things seem to come at the right time. It is true. So I think the things that we need to be most careful of, and so as someone who is a huge proponent of ketamine. Definitely be careful when it comes to things like ketamine, MDMA, of course, things like cocaine, any of that. Those are things that can be laced with fentanyl, which that wasn't it when I was younger and doing, let's say, a lot more recreational exploration. I mean, I'll be honest, the thing that I've done the most of in my life, I've been doing drugs for 30 years. So I feel as if I have quite a large expertise in the doing of drugs. And we'll just say, without all the spirituality and all the importance and the emphasis on transformation, they're still drugs. Drugs are drugs. That's not a bad thing, as I see it. But it was a lot safer. It used to be a lot safer. You were just concerned about if you were going to take too much of it, not if it was going to have something else adulterating it. So that is, I'd say, safety and harm reduction is a huge concern in terms of sourcing, just that I want to put out there. But make sure that you're comfortable with the person that you would be sourcing from. Make sure that you maybe know the person, or it's a trusted source of a really good friend, or just have connection, have personal connection. We're I think in a world where tech connection can feel sometimes like personal connection, and it's not. It does not replace what we do, kind of, the way we chop wood and carry water, so to speak. You got to chop the wood, you got to carry water, you got to walk the walk, be present, do things in person, talk to people, smell them, look at them, sense them, taste them. This is how we can kind of figure out if we're in settings that actually feel resonant to us. In terms of getting started, actually, let's say going on an ayahuasca journey or going on a psilocybin journey or something like that. I mean, again, speak to your friends, speak to people who might have already walked these paths. And also, I think that we really need to create an opening for the fact that people who might feel resonant at one time, that can change. So let's say I've sat with medicine carriers, and for a year or two, that was a great place for me. And then I needed to shift being a part of that community because it was time for something else. So also being open to the fact that it doesn't mean that those are untrusted people, but that our needs do change. So yeah, again, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but these are big questions. So
Yes, no, that you've done a great job answering the questions. I know I've like thrown a lot at you, but it really resonates because having that connection with the medicine, I think is really important, and understanding where it comes from, just like our food source. Like we want to know what's being put into our bodies. Um, be just like you said earlier about shifting into like different containers when it's right. So, like I've definitely seen myself shift into different ceremonies or containers because I was complete. Like I haven't really gone into the ayahuasca world since 2019, and I still feel complete with it, and I'm not jumping right back in. So I think what you're saying is really important, that people are very in tune with their bodies and their feelings and how to navigate those, and really building that relationship with self, which is part of the medicine journey. So I love everything that you have shared. Another question that popped up actually from Max, because I feel like this is relevant to what we were talking about. He asked, would you say that most feelings we feel are reactions based off of survival, and a lot of it doesn't serve us, whereas intuition is got often harder to detect?
yeah, it's a really good question. I do think that without a lot of awareness and a lot of introspective time, we as humans at this point do find ourselves in very reactive states. And so eh, now, is that reactivity part of our truth? Sure. But is that necessarily what we most, like, what is underneath? Is that the more underneath layer, or an underneath layer? Maybe not. And so let me give an example, and this is a personal example. In my life, I've dealt with a lot of abandonment. My parents got divorced when I was really young. It was very contentious. A lot went on. It was challenging, et cetera, et cetera. So, in all of this work that I've done and continue to do, identifying abandonment as a really a really big theme for me has been important. And so it's very easy for me to, in situations, to feel abandoned. And so then it comes to asking myself the question, am I being abandoned, or am I someone who feels abandoned? And it's a big distinction. And it's something that, you can work with this in friendships, you can work with this in intimate relationships, because we can be very reactive. It's true. So I appreciate Maxie bringing that up. We can be very reactive. Someone does something. So for me, someone does something, I can be like, oh, I've been abandoned. You've abandoned me. Oh, you're terrible. Why did you abandon me? Versus taking some time. Hold on. Have I been abandoned? Or do I feel abandoned as a person, as one of my bigger wounds that I get to work with in my life? Making that distinction can then draw one back from the reactivity that can lead to a whole bunch of just events happening between you and someone else, or you and multiple someone else's. Being able to step back and just own, wow, okay, I feel abandoned. By the way, that doesn't mean that someone didn't do something that was hurtful, and that might need to be addressed. But does it need to be addressed that minute? Does it even need to be addressed that day? Back to slowing down and giving ourselves space. I think that's where we can start to figure out, am I reacting to things because these are my wounds and these are my pains and this is just how I'm going to carry it through? Or can I recognize a pattern in me and start working to change it, and stepping back and taking the time? That is how we change our patterns. That is how we start to really redirect and shift ourselves as people. Um, by the way, the medicine work is amazing. Medicine work is great. The medicine work isn't the work. Medicine work, if anything, it opens the door to the opportunity to do the work. The work is done in the everyday, in what I call the mundane moments. I love the mundane moments. I relish them. Sit down on my couch, see what happens. It's not as glamorous necessarily as being in the ayahuasca ceremony or whatever it is, but that is where we do the work. So I think that most of the time people are quite reactive, and if we could just put a little bit more space and a little bit more introspection in, but it requires practice, and it does take time to cultivate that inner voice, because that inner intelligence and that intuition, your intuitive inner healer self is not abandoned. My intuitive inner healer, my spirit, my soul, the me that loves me so much isn't abandoned. But my very human self can go through a lot of that. So taking some time, observing, giving myself space, loving myself when in fact I do want to react, and yet being able to draw myself back and take a look at the bigger picture. Yeah, these are important skills that we cultivate if we want to live a more intentional life, as opposed to that reactive life.
I love what you said about like these medicines are just openings and opportunities. I think that's like a very powerful way to look at these medicines, because sometimes people are like, again, chasing the highs or chasing that experience. But what oftentimes happens, and that I see in medicine, and I'm not trying to come from like a place of judgment, but like there's no integration. There's no integration into the everyday. Like you get these beautiful awarenesses, but there is no integration. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I also want to um, see if we can talk a little bit about, how do we get to those awarenesses inside of, or how can we utilize the states of consciousness to get these glimmers of insights? And then how do we start to integrate that into our life? And how do you recommend people to process that and utilize what they received from the medicines or even from hypnotherapy and other altered states of consciousness?
Yeah. Um, one of the things that when I was working with a hypnotherapist before I before I ever learned how to do it was having she would give me like homework assignments essentially. Like she called them growth work as opposed to homework. But it gave me a chance to reflect on themes that would come up. And so we can do that with ourselves, right? So let's say you have a big journey and there's a few themes, or even just one theme, doesn't have to be a few, one theme. Uh, Start again, we're back to the daily, we're back to what we do on the daily. What we do on the daily, that's what makes our life. So taking those themes and starting to put them into some kind of a daily practice. Again, that can be the sitting for 5 minutes and seeing how you're feeling, or you go into the sitting for 5 minutes with the theme as the contemplative centerpiece. So one of the things that I like to help people to understand, because of how much I needed this, you don't suddenly need to start spending 3 hours a day on this stuff. If that's too much. It's overwhelming. Trying to attain wellness in this competitive sport that has become spiritual wellness is overwhelming. When I first started doing medicine work, I was like, okay, just breathe for 5 minutes a day. Like just conscientiously breathe. Because one of the messages that was really clear to me is that going back to my breath in an intentional way, that doesn't mean a certain breath pattern. It doesn't mean breath work per se. Just going back to my breath and allowing myself space. I could listen. For myself, I'd put on this one song and I would just breathe with myself. Even that, you have to, for me, the message of you've got to go back to your breath so that you can do anything else. And you need to get more comfortable with your own breath as a guide. Okay, great. It was just, and I was like, just try this for a few minutes. Just do it for 5 minutes. Because the idea of suddenly establishing a yoga practice, establishing a meditation practice, establishing a this and a that was way too much. I was contending with so much, right? So starting small and then stepping it forward and finding one thing. And then you know what? Let's say you do that for a couple of weeks and you're like, it's not the breath. It's not the breath. I need to I find myself naturally journaling about this one feeling or this one thing. You know what? Okay, I'm gonna 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes, doesn't matter, a little tiny chunk. I'm just gonna journal for X minutes about this theme and just see what comes. But and then, oh gosh, the journaling thing isn't working. Okay, something else. So it doesn't have to be one practice. And that's a really important part of integration, is understanding that there's no one way to do it. There's no one way that it looks, and there's no one technique or something that is going to be the thing for everybody. Everybody's really different in the way that we all need to eat differently to eat healthy, in the way that in order to help address our gut microbiome, we need different inputs, different foods, different supplements, even different strains of various pre and probiotics. Two people aren't going to get the same result from the same thing. Two people have really different needs. They have really different compositions. I'm one person, and every time I go into a medicine journey, I have a different composition, and I'm just the one person. So that's a really important thing to also understand. We're different every time we go and do whatever it is. So having that opportunity, or taking that opportunity to be open to trying and implementing different things, into understanding that it is something of a process of trial and error. To your question on integration, I am a huge proponent of having a reflection in that integration process, meaning doing some integration coaching with someone who can help to walk you through that process. I come to that after not having that, and starting to see how all of these things that we do talk about more now, like preparation and integration, are really important. I was probably better personally on the preparation end. Nobody told me anything about integration ever. So I really had to just figure things out on my own, and they probably could have gone more smoothly with some more assistance. Um, which does bring us to the deep importance of a compassionate witness. And um, and I'd also like to say that, may the people that we surround ourselves with, professionals, friends, you know, be a compassionate witness. Um, I'm pretty wary of people that refer to themselves as healers. I'm definitely wary of people who refer to themselves as shamans unless they truly come from a shamanic lineage and have trained for decades. And the term shaman is a lineage term. I mean, it's a very specific term. Um, so I guess I think of myself as a practitioner, and really, someone who walks alongside people as they do their work, as they do their inner healing work, and keep them physically safe if they're going through something that requires, a certain amount of monitoring, and as a big journey, let's say, would. But you know, may we love our inner healer. May we most value our inner healer. That is the person doing the work. The medicine is not doing the work. Um, so and so who calls themselves the healer is not doing the work. You're doing the work, which is amazing. It's amazing because whatever it is you do, you get to own that. That doesn't rest in someone else's hands or with someone else's expertise. So I just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Oh, I love that you said that because I have the same thoughts exactly. We're all healers. We're just guiding ourselves back to ourselves, and also having that person support us is so important in really identifying those areas for us. They're not healing us. They're not the person doing the work. We are, but they're definitely an important part as being the guide. So you're I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that what you said. Another question I had, and then I'll get back to like the audience questions, but it was around this idea that expanding consciousness, it's like love and light, it's all like roses and it's all like fun. And I always like to joke with my friends that like when we signed up for our ascension path that we didn't read the fine print, and the fine print goes through a lot of like hard shit, and a lot of things that we have to like uncover about ourselves. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about the challenges that people might face as they expand their consciousness, and then we'll get back into the audience questions.
Yeah. So something that is, by the way, love and light are beautiful. Who doesn't like love and light? I love love and light. Um, but let's not make any mistakes that it's a ton of darkness alongside love and light. We don't get one without the other. We must, as people, really start to understand that everything exists in its opposite. Everything exists in polarity. I think we see that with the yin yang sign, right, from in the Chinese tradition, and with traditional Chinese medicine, and that idea that in the white space is the black dot, and in the black space is the white dot, right? So amongst the darkness we find light, and within the light there's darkness. That's just how it works. So we have most definitely, in our desire to make beautiful Instagram posts and whatnot, kind of whitewashed spirituality and turned it into this, right, the good vibes only, or the vibe tribe, or whatever those things are. And that's not how it works. And by the way, being in pain and walking through the darkness, that is not a bad vibe. That is not a bad vibe at all. Um, that is that is life. That is real. And it's a very different thing, to honestly say, hey, I'm in a dark spot and I am just swimming in the mud and I am just in the muck, versus taking that out on people and being angry and just like flinging it around. Those are two really different things. Being honestly in those hard spaces within us is the work. That is the work, far more than the love and the light aspect of it. But going through those really challenging moments tends to help us to access the love and the light. So I think that the promotion of that kind of one end of it is sort of the promotion of the finished product without acknowledging and giving credence to all of the thousands and millions and whatever steps it took to get there. And so I always try to remind people that when we go into psychedelics and we open Pandora's box, we open the box. We don't get to pick and choose what we open. And so going into, or in hypnosis too, anything in breath work, we're going to open a box. So now it does come down to our preparation and our integration. Now it does come down to the important pieces that tend to fall away a little bit, in the shadow of the glorious medicine or the glorious altered state with or without medicine experience. So remembering that we're opening a box, we're going to see what we're going to see. Now it depends on how we prepared for what we're going to encounter and how we integrate. And then, integration and preparation on the back end, at least, you're integrating something, but you're simultaneously preparing yourself for whatever that next step is. So it's kind of the same thing in some ways. But it's there's this concept of spiritual emergence versus spiritual emergency. And spiritual emergencies used to land people in psych wards. Actually, they probably still do. They do. Yeah, they still do. But when handled with harm reduction, with knowledge, with love, with patience, with proper direction, a spiritual emergency can be a spiritual emergence. And that's what we always want. We always, ideally want it to be an emergence. That doesn't always mean that everything goes how we want, but that would be the goal. But it's a fine line between emergency and emergence.
I love that too. I never heard of that analogy about, emergence and emergency, but that's so true because it's just the other side of the coin. And it's just depending on which side you wanna be on. And I feel like this is an important conversation because there's a lot of people that spiritually bypass and they won't go through the muck and they just, well, everything's okay, and they're not really digging in. So I'm glad that you brought this up. There's a
Yeah.
question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say everything grows out of the mud. Everything comes out of the mud. We have to go into the mud if we wanna grow anything. We just have
Yeah.
to.
It's just like the lily. I think the lily is in like the mud, like the water lily or
The
something.
lotus. Yeah,
Lotus,
the lotus.
lotus, that's what it
Mhm.
was. Lotus. I knew
Yeah.
something pretty was coming out of the mud. I couldn't remember what.
Yes.
So Max has a question. What do you think about altered states of consciousness being able to alter memories? And what about altered states of being very hard to record memories so that it can lead to a bit of confusion after being altered? It's hard to draw from that experience because we can't remember all the details. So basically, I think he's asking about how altered states of consciousness alters our memories and figuring out what is real.
So there can be a lot of going within ourselves, and sometimes people might remember something that maybe didn't technically happen. People might not remember something that did happen, and there can definitely be some, we could call it memory distortion. It's hard to say, right? Unless we had a videotape of our lives that we could literally go and press play on and see what actually happened. I guess I would say in those cases, maybe it's less important what really happened. If I look back to my young life, I'm going to see what I see. My mom's going to see what she sees. My dad's going to see what he sees. All three of us are going to see the exact same, I guess, biological time event differently. If there had been a tape recording, maybe we'd see the actual event, but we're all truly having a completely different experience of that event, complete with different memories, sounds, colors, time spans, all of it. So I think in those cases, it's really important to, again, go to what are the feelings? What are the associations? What's coming up? Because the truth is, we're all right. Everybody's right. And that's been a really interesting one for me to work with, the idea that everybody's right. Um, Even though we very much want to say, no, I'm right. you're wrong, or this is black, this is white, this is up, this is down. So in those cases, I would say maybe a little bit less emphasis on the kind of biographical nature and a little bit more on how does this go to larger themes, or how does this affect me now? And also, I know some work that I've done with myself too is to step back a little bit from trying to remember everything specifically, or even feeling like I need to remember everything, and then trusting that what is coming, what I'm experiencing is just, it's what I need to move forward, and I don't actually necessarily need to go into the analysis or the remembering of every detail, because sometimes we can get stuck there, and we can almost like re-injure ourselves by getting really tied up in trying to reconstruct things. And so there's different ways to work with that, but I think remembering the subjective nature of memory in an altered state and in our regular state, right? If we look at like eyewitness testimony and everything we know about how flawed eyewitness testimony can be, it's certainly amplified in the psychedelic space. So again, returning more to what are the feelings, what are the themes, how does this connect into my larger purpose, can sometimes be a little bit more instructive.
Thank you for that. That was a beautiful take. Because I love what you said. Everybody is right. We all have different viewpoints on it. It's just a different lens that we look at stuff. And final questions before we end. Like, what advice would you give somebody who is embarking on this journey about altered states of consciousness? Any last advice or parting words that you want to share with people?
Yeah, I realize, and we started with this, but one of the things that I say to people most, in all aspects, whether we're working together in Pilates, hypnotherapy, psychedelics, is slow down, slow down. And this has been a really important message to myself, because my whole philosophy for most of my life was bigger, better, faster, harder, more. Um, and yeah, I mean, you can get a lot done with that for sure, and you can hurt yourself a lot with that for sure. And so when it comes to these kinds of places and spaces where we're going to look at, we're going within, and we're going to visit places. It may not be that every place we go is this like injured, you know, place. I mean, we're just going somewhere that we don't know. And so when we're just going somewhere that we don't know, whatever that's going to be, let's slow it down a little bit. Let's be a little bit more mindful. When people come to me and they're like, I need to have this medicine now. I need to go on this journey now. I'm going to slow them down. And if they don't like that, we're probably not going to work together, because I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to compromise just to work on someone else's like amped up timeline, even though I understand how desperate it can feel, to want to create change. So I would say to slow down, um, you know, try, if possible, to approach as a curious observer, as opposed to the solution oriented, I must do XYZ so that I can get to XYZ in XYZ time frame. Because there's not a time frame. It's not going to go how you think. You probably won't find what you think you're going to find. You might find some of it. You might find a lot of other stuff. You might not find any of it. It's such a unique individual experience. So if we can slow it down and practice being the curious observer of our own experience, and attempt to release a little bit of expectation. And I say that because this idea that we're going to just like stop expecting things, well, that's preposterous. As preposterous as it is to think that we're going to sit down and start to meditate and like not have thoughts. Like this is a thinking machine. It's like sitting down and being like, hey, heart, stop beating. That's not going to happen. That's what it does. It's doing its job. We're doing our job as thinking machines. So also remembering that we are who we are, to slow it down, be a little curious, and most importantly, love ourselves in the messiness that these processes are. So when you sit down to be curious and you're like, I'm not curious, I just want this other thing. Okay, I love you anyway. I love you just because you're who you are. Okay, great. So that's where you're at this minute. You might not be in that same place in 5 minutes. Allowing for some space to, explore as it comes, and try to hold ourselves with as much love and compassion as we can, while doing things that are new and doing things that aren't innate to all of the training and all of the messages that we have, many of us at least, have received our entire lives. Everything that I Most things that I have talked about are things I've had to come to and learn and teach myself as an adult. Nobody was showing me this stuff early on. So it's been a lot of rewiring, and it takes time. It takes time to rewire. So giving ourselves that grace is really important.
Thank you so much for being on today. This was such a beautiful conversation. I know a lot of people got value from this, and we just want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and all of your guidance on getting into altered states of consciousness. And feel free to reach out to Rachel. She's in our WhatsApp group if you have any other questions. But thank you again for being on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.